So when we speak about possessions, there's an understanding that people have that are like demons out there. And these demons that people envisage are the shayateen or the jinn. And they come and take over. They somehow, people may vary in their interpretation, but they come into the minds or they take over the body of people. And usually what they do is they make a person go ill. This is the public perception, I'm just saying. I'm not saying this is correct. This is what the myths, the general urban myth out there is that once these demons have possessed people, they usually become ill. They develop some kind of perceptible mental health issues, so they become weird. They might appear obsessive. They've got OCD. This is what people, their relationships usually mess up. This is one of the key things that, okay, the relationship's going downhill. It's usually, or they've developed some kind of illness or a bout of insanity. They act weird. Or sometimes what could be called catatonic schizophrenia or something, or they develop weird limb actions and they freeze and they twitch and they got all these kind of gestures going on. And so this is usually, when people see this is what they picture as jinn possessions. And also in the bouts of insanity, they're screaming and shouting and anxiety and all this stuff. Now, first, the key question is why would the jinn be doing this? That's one question comes to mind. We're not saying it's definitely not true, but let's just entertaining this premise for a moment. Why would the jinn be doing this? What is the objective of the jinn in doing this to start off with? Well, the key thing that comes to mind that most people believe, the kind of cultural myths out there, is to create mischief on earth. This is their interpretation, that to create fitna and fasad and to destroy relationships and to harm Bani Adam. This is what people think. So that's the topic at hand. It's not the topic, sorry, this is the problem at hand that we're trying to deconstruct and show. Well, actually, now with that in mind, that picture, let's go back to the true sources, the Quran, the Sunnah, the authentic Sunnah, and the sound voice of reason, and let's take a look at this. Right, jinn possession, demonic possessions, the way people picture this understanding that we've defined does not actually exist. But I want to go into where is this confusion stemming from within the Quran and Sunnah? Where is this coming from? And then I want to take a look at psychological perspectives and also highlight some, Shaykh Akram had highlighted earlier on about sometimes there are medical issues which we don't know. Like sometimes there's a problem, we don't know why that is. But just by not knowing, does it mean it's the jinn? That's a 100% valid point. And I will highlight as well some psychological cases that I want to share with you guys, but that will be in my second part. I want to take a look at that to just show the complexity of some cases, and if you go back a few decades, how that could be so easily inexplicable. And you have to remember that the backdrop to all of this is coming from a single point, and that is human beings trying to explain what's going on around them. You see, we have to remember that historically, the most learned people in any society were the scholars, were the religious scholars of any religion. So in Christianity, the monks were the people who could read and write. In Hinduism, the Brahmins. In Islam, the ulama. But in Islam, there is this thing that all Muslims should read the Quran, so there was literacy to that level. But most people, if you think about it historically, were just farmers. Most of society was always just farmers. Just worked, lived on a farm their entire life. Then you had small versions of cities, not like today's. And people, generally speaking, they had trade and they did their things, but lives were relatively simple. People who learnt stuff, who studied mathematics, who studied trigonometry, who studied philosophy, history of the world, poetry, who studied belief, who studied other religions, who studied... This was just the ulama who dedicated a huge portion of their lives to learning and then usually went on to teach or become judges and things like this. Your normal, in the past, you wouldn't go to buy something from a shop and the guy happens to be, for hobby, he happens to be a researcher on mathematics, or he happens to be somebody who's deeply read on history, or this didn't happen ever. It was not like, I don't mean as a totally somebody who was an expert and then did a job but this was not the norm at all. So let's say you had ulama in the past speaking about atoms. Can an atom actually linguistically means something that can't be divided any further. So you had people like Abu Bakr al-Baqalani debating with other ulama of the Asha'ira and other mutakallimin. Can there be al-juz'u alladhi la yatajazza? Can there be an atom, or is that further reducible? Think about it. Why were ulama? And they're arguing this. They're going on time after time after time. You think today ulama wouldn't do that, but why would they do it? You have detailed discussions on where is the aql? Where is the aql? In the past, many ulama, is it in the dimagh, in the brain? Many ulama said no, the aql ain't in the dimagh. Why are they bringing these questions to the ulama? Who else should they take them to? So people say, you have aql, you have cognition. Where is it? So people said, So the ulama are using their resources to come up with answers. These are not necessarily religious questions. These are just worldly human questions. So the ulama are saying, but Allah says, جَعَلْنَا لَهُمْ أَفْئِدَةً. We gave you hearts. أَفَلَا تَعْقِلُونَ. Don't you think? The fu'ad, the heart is where aql is. Imam Abu Hanifa, so you get quotes from many of the Salaf saying the heart is where the aql is. Imam Abu Hanifa actually said the dimagh is where the aql was. But many people disagreed with him back then. They believed that the dimagh, like Greek philosophy, just had these humors in it, these kind of fluids and gases which kind of just influence your temperament. Why is this important to understand? That people were coming with normal whatever problems, asking these people to explain them. And they were trying to come up with some answer to help these people. Right, so that is, because we need to keep that in mind when we're dealing with this. So why are the ulama, where is this confusion coming from within Islam? Certain verses had historically been debated. Verses in the Quran, Allah speaks about a very popular verse that when Allah speaks about those people who take riba, لا يقومون إلا كما يقوم الذي يتخبطه الشيطان من المس. Those who take riba do not kind of go about their daily affairs, except how لا يقومون, or they do not stand, or however you want to see this, or لا يقومون, as though they do not go about their daily affairs, except as though somebody who has been يتخبط in Arabic means to become unstable. Like you've been all over the place. As though somebody has become unstable due to mas, like this touch by a devil or a demon. What does this mean? So some people said, so what people coming to this, people who are supporting this whole jinn possession, they say, here's a verse in the Quran highlighting this. First of all, people who were taking riba were not doing that. They were people who looked normal. People who were taking riba weren't actually acting mental. They were just people looking out for their interests. They were just saying, no, I'll give you 100 if you can bring me back 200 at the end of the month. They weren't kind of like all over the place and acting like lunatics. So many mufassirin had highlighted, this is talking about in the akhirah. That لا يقومون إلى الآخرة, or min quburihim, or when they rise from the graves, they will be all over the place. And some people said, no, this is, so it's not even talking, it's got nothing to do with this, jinn possession. Some people said, oh, well, this is speaking here about them in their lust and greed. That this is how, it's as though they're possessed. They're so greedy, they don't want to help people. This greed has so overtaken them, it's as though they've lost their mental faculty. But why this massum min ash-shaytan? Why this touch of the shaitan? Why does it have a reality? Why would Allah use this as an example if it wasn't real? This is the question. So here, many people had highlighted, including the Mufassir like Ibn Atiyah and other people, that this is imagery. That Allah draws upon the imagination of mankind when He's addressing them. Let's take another example. Let's take a look at the verse in the Quran where Allah is speaking about Jahannam. And He says that in there's this tree, Shajaratum min Zaqqum, this devastating tree. And then Allah says that طَلْعُهَا كَأَنَّهَا رَؤُوسُ الشَّيَاطِينَ, that it emerges as though it's the heads of devils. Have you seen a devil? Has anybody seen a devil? So how do they know what that's supposed to mean? When you say that, oh, this tree looks like it's the heads of devils, but I haven't seen a devil, that's because it's okay. You have imagination. Allah knows, He is a'lam bi khalqihi. He knows they have creation, that they have imagination. And what's interesting here as a side note is that in life, the most intimidating and frightening phenomenon that you will ever encounter right throughout life, contrary to what you may think, is actually your own imagination. Your own imagination is far more scarier than anything actually out there. What you actually imagine scares the hell out of you. So Allah is drawing upon the imagination of people. So this verse is one of the key verses that is misused or misinterpreted by people who draw into this or draw upon this whole jinn demonic possession kind of narrative. A few hadith I want to highlight as well, and I'm sure the Shaykh will be highlighting as well several perspectives. But just popularly, these are brought to the discourse straight away because I want to take a look at the religious kind of aspect first, and the kind of rational, and then come back to the psychological and stuff like that in the second section. So there's a few hadith, 3 hadith. First of all, I just want to highlight there isn't a single sahih, sarih hadith in this bab. Not a single hadith that is free of criticism. There are a few hadith, there are many hadith which are just completely weak or weak. There are certain which rise above that weakness thing, and I'll just highlight the 2 or 3 that are usually used in this context. But there is nothing which is sarih and sahih, unquestionably. So as in it's free from criticism. Taking into consideration, like just take this point into consideration, that the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has come as a paragon of mercy for mankind. Not just for the Sahaba or for the people around him, forever. And he never transmits this, he doesn't teach people about this. And think about it, this is going to impact us all every day. And he forgets to tell us, or he chooses not to tell us. Clearly, think about it. So the hadith that are usually used is a hadith to do with, there's a transmitter, Ya'la ibn Murrah, that he accompanies the Prophet. He's a person from Bani Thaqif who accompanies the Prophet on a journey, and he says that I saw 3 things which nobody else saw, and one of them was that when the Prophet was walking past this lady on a journey, she had a baby, it was crying, and the Prophet said, okay, and he exercises this, and he brings out this demon. This is one narration that is used. Not sahih. Some have tried to argue it to be sahih, but not unquestionably sahih. So as in, it's not free from, the rawi is usually, the popular ruwat of it is Manhal ibn Amr, it's been criticized. You've got people like Abdurrahman, but whoever is in the chain has had criticism. Okay. Second hadith, and the fact that this hadith actually says, I saw three things, one of them this which nobody else saw. And the jinn affects everybody, and the Prophet decided to just show one person and never tell the other people, in itself is absurd. That the Prophet wouldn't teach us how to protect ourselves. Second understanding, second hadith is one of Uthman ibn Abil As, once again from Bani Thaqif, that is Thaqafi, who comes to the Prophet in a delegation in 9th Hijri, and he complains. Now this hadith is transmitted in different books, one in Sahih Muslim, and then other books, Ibn Majah, Tabrani, and the narration kind of varies a bit. The Sahih narration, which is sound, is that he comes to the Prophet and he says that I'm struggling with the Quran. This is what he says. And he says, I'm struggling with this in Sahih Muslim. And he doesn't mention exactly what the struggle is, but he says that I struggle with the Quran. And the Prophet says to him that, he tells him, and in the hadith he kind of, فَضَرَبَ صَدْرَهُ بِيَدِهِ, like he kind of like taps his chest with his hand, and he tells him that umma qawmak, go and lead your people, فَإِنَّ مِنْهُمُ الضَّعِيفُ وَالْقَوِيِّ, and they've got different mixed abilities in them. You've got strong people, weak people, so on. And he says after that, Wallahi, the Quran was always with me, like I never. Now in other narrations, that narration is sahih. Other narrations, like which are criticized and weak, and some people have tried to say they're okay, but they're not sound, as in they're not unquestionable. They've been questioned and weakened by some people. That he says, oh, I've got a shaitan, and the Prophet says, he kind of aspirates, like does that kind of tafal, what we call in Arabic, and it's like slightly with salivated aspiration, like to go like this towards him, and he opens his mouth and he says, "Ukhruj adu Allah," come out the enemy of Allah, and something comes out. This is not established. Okay, Imam Nawawi, when commenting on this in Sahih Muslim, says all of these riwayats are talking about one qissa. And he says that, and there is no evidence in these that is to do with jinn possession. He says that this is most likely, he says when he was struggling with the Quran, it was either hifth, or Imam Nawawi says maybe it was kibr, that he felt arrogant that he was leading his people. And so this is what Imam Nawawi highlights on this, and he says that this is the sound narration in which none of this is mentioned. There's another hadith which people bring quite a bit, which is to do with a woman, Aban, once again, very criticized, that she speaks about her grandfather, saying her grandfather came with a child, saying that the child is ill, and the Prophet says, same kind of thing, ukhruj ya adu Allah, come out, O enemy of Allah, and they saw something coming out. Heavily criticized. Some people just say da'if, some people said it's very weak, and some people try to strengthen these incidents, but once again, nothing sarih, sahih. For such a ubiquitous event, for something that would affect everybody, the Prophet doesn't really transmit anything in sound transmission. So it's important to take this understanding. We will be hearing a lot more about ulama that have taken certain positions, that have what they've said, and on both sides. And I want to go into some psychological cases as well to explain things like that. But the most important thing here is I want to highlight something, and that is that it's actually, it's been said earlier on today, you heard it earlier on today, but also people like Imam Ghazali have highlighted, and many other people, that bil-aqli yu'rafu sidquddin, that we only know whether something is accurate through reason. When the Quran came to people, you see, this is people's logic today. People's logic today is, why is this true? Because it says so here. Well, how do you know that's true? Because it says, so for example, how do you know the Quran is true? Well, it says so in the Quran. That's an illogical statement. That's not how the Quran came to us to invite us to the Quran. Allah said, Allah didn't say, believe in me. Why? Because I said so in the Quran. And who revealed the Quran? I did. And therefore believe in me because I said, believe in me in the Quran. Allah said, أَفَلَا يَنْظُرُونَ إِلَى الْإِبْلِ كَيْفَ خُلِقَتْ. Do they not look at the, أَفَلَا إِلَى السَّمَاءِ كَيْفَ. Don't they look at the sky? Don't they look here? Don't they? Does it make any sense this world has come like this? أَفَلَا تَعْقِلُونَ. Do you not ponder over the Quran? أَفَلَا يَتَدَبَّرُونَ الْقُرْآنَ. Is there any ikhtilaf in it? Is there? Allah is calling you to the voice of reason. He's saying, believe me. He's condemning this thing of saying, oh, هَذَا مَا وَجَدْنَا عَلَيْهِ آبَاءَنَا. When you say to them, listen to reason, they say, oh, no, this is what our forefathers used to do. So how could you? So the Quran itself comes with this understanding that look, you have to resort to reason. Now with reason, you can accept. You do accept. I accept the Quran. I accept this. It makes sense to me. But when we come across these issues, we have to bounce them back on this voice of reason through accessing the Quran. So it's important that this is something that I want us all to keep in mind, because this is very key to this topic of demonic possessions and stuff like this. That where are we getting all these ideas from? To sum this segment, I just want to say that where are we getting all these ideas from? Because if you came in a vacuum, you had no cultural history, you were just an alien, you just came, approached the Quran and read this, you wouldn't have this understanding that these things happen. And the second point, that look, people had to explain phenomenon that occurred to them in their environment. And they used the best understanding they could. And they saw people acting weird. They couldn't explain it. Maybe it is the jinn. Maybe it is. So they accepted it. But what about as time progresses and we get a greater understanding of what's going on? People misuse several evidences, and I'd highlighted before that our understanding comes to us either through what is textual, rational, experiential, or cultural sources. This is where we derive our knowledge from. Now, what's interesting is there is a hadith that is used a lot by people, and this in itself, if we just sometimes just pause with hadith or evidences when they're being used by people and just look at the bigger picture, it has the answer in it. So we just heard a hadith, Shaykh Akram had just read a hadith which is used by many such people, that inna shaytana yajri min ibn Adam majrad dam. That shaitan, he flows through the blood of the son of Adam, through people. This is how he. Now this hadith, it has a context. The actual hadith contains the context that the Prophet is walking with his wife, and there's a group of people standing there, and as they walk past, they carry on, and the Prophet stops and he comes back and he says, Innaha Safiya, that's my wife Safiya, by the way, with me. And they say, Subhanallah, Ya Rasulullah, that you don't need to say anything, as though you don't need to justify to us, you're Rasulullah. And this is in the context of the hadith. This is a Sahih hadith. This is in the hadith. They say, Subhanallah, Ya Rasulullah, you are who you are. And he says, Inna shaytana yajri min ibn Adam majrad dam. That shaitan, that the insinuations of the shaitan are with each and all. These people weren't possessed. These people weren't like acting all like unstable, and they were all over the place, and they weren't behaving any weird symptom, displaying any weird symptoms. They were just, the fact, suspicion. That's what the Prophet was speaking about. That look, I'm not saying you were being suspicious, but it is human to sometimes have insinuations, have negative thoughts about people. That's human. So just keeping that in mind. And I want us to take a look at the experiential and then the psychological. Right, just speaking, before we get into that, you just heard some examples about people being so easily conned into a culture. This is a multi-million pound industry. That said, I'm not saying that everybody in it is necessarily devious and plotting, people actually buy into the idea as well. So I'm not saying many of these Iraqis may be very sincere in what they do. They've just bought into the idea, that's all. Experiences is an interesting one. Why is it that we only take our experiences? You heard just a few minutes ago that these jinn problems only seem to affect those people who believe in them. You don't see atheists, you don't see mega atheists, you don't see non-Muslims getting afflicted. Now, and why only our experiences? If we're going to say, yeah, because a lot of people, when you tell them these things don't exist, I'll tell you, the first thing they'll say, they won't say, yeah, but some may say now that, oh, because of this hadith or that, because they've learnt that. But most people will say, no, my uncle, his nephew or his niece, I witnessed, or I know somebody who this happened to, or my auntie, or my mother. People will use anecdotal experiences to say, oh, but so-and-so, they experienced this. The question is, why only our experiences? Why not everybody's experiences? Why not other faiths? Why do we discount immediately things like reincarnations? I've quoted before on several occasions, why do we discount miracles of the Hindu sadhus? And why immediately, even though they could have millions of followers? And I've quoted an example of who was very famous in his time, Satya Sai Baba, saying that he had demonstrated in front of apparently millions of people miracles. And he had millions attesting to his miracles. Yet you wouldn't for a second entertain it. Like if I told you that, even for a second, you won't entertain it. You won't even think for a few seconds, you know what, maybe he is doing all of this. You'll just dismiss it immediately. And the interesting thing is you'll start to reason against it. You'll start to use reason. Even though when I present, let's say I present cases of demonic possessions, you'll never resort to reason. But to discount and discredit other religions, immediately the voice of reason is called up. Like when you say, oh, but this is dumb like people say, oh, but it's absurd in Christianity to say 3 equals 1. They don't say, well, you say, well, why is it absurd? Oh, because Allah says in the Quran. No, they say, because look, logic, it doesn't make sense. They say it's absurd to say, oh, the Hindu mythology. This is absurd. Why? Not because Allah says, because it's absurd. They say it doesn't make any sense. When you present the same thing from what has been Islamicized, they shut down. No, it doesn't matter, I've experienced. Now, what's interesting, there has been a psychological study on certain people when they're going through religious experiences and they're listening to their preachers and they're listening to like they're attending church or they're attending things, and people have checked and they've measured kind of brain neural activity, and they thought what they were and you can find these kind of the results of this online. They thought they were going to find a lot of certain neurotransmitters being released and positive feelings and all this, like, you know, the preachers going on, but what they actually found was the prefrontal cortex, which is involved in a lot of our thinking and rational thing. Actually, activity in it shuts down when we're going through our own religious stuff, when we're engaging in our own religious kind of ceremonies. Neural activity in the prefrontal cortex seems to shut down, which is interesting. So people block themselves from reasoning when it comes to their own faith. That's just, I thought, well, and you see, when I said here that we don't see jinn possessions happening with kuffar or with atheists or something, people might say, oh, but how do you not know that the mental illnesses are not jinn possessions? You see, this is like, I want to give you an allegory, a kind of a story paradigm of a child who doesn't understand the world and asks its mother, the mother that, why is this happening? Why is that happening? Why is that happening? And the mother doesn't have the answers. So the mother says, well, what it is the mother comes up with a cyborg invasion paradigm where the mother says what it is these cyborgs, these kind of like human-like artificial intelligence, is responsible for everything. That's the mother's answer. So the mother says that this is what's making, so why is this happening? Oh, because artificial intelligence and these cyborgs have done this and they've done this, and oh, they've convinced this person to do this. So this becomes the conspiracy. Now the child, because it trusts the mother, takes on this paradigm. The child can use this to answer anything that it can't understand in the world. So when you say, oh, but why is an earthquake? Oh, but this was a conspiracy, which really the cyborgs, and oh, but why is Donald Trump doing this? Really, Donald Trump has been convinced by the cyborgs who've done this. Oh, electronic stuff is like, if you've just got one version to answer everything, then yes, you can do that, but it doesn't make it true. Like Muslims have got this, like their version of this cyborg paradigm is jinn. Anything, oh, it's just the jinn then. Oh, but he doesn't accept it because he's already been influenced by the jinn. Oh, but, this person had a mental illness. Oh, that was the jinn. Oh, this happened, this is magic. Oh, well, that was the jinn. Oh, so it's just this, you have one the plasticity, because it stretches, you can just fit this on anything. This is in philosophy of religion, you study this example by somebody known as Basil Mitchell, known as the parable of the partisan and the stranger. And he says that this is what faith people do. The partisan is this person who's part of a movement, a revolution, and there's a struggle going on. But he meets this stranger one day who he doesn't know. The stranger somehow wins his trust and tells him that he is actually the leader of this revolution that he's a part of. Because this is obviously picturing back in the days when you never had social media and stuff. So he convinces him, I am actually the leader of this. So imagine it's me and I now bump into you, and you're you believe in this, and I tell you, I am the actual leader of this. And stay strong. I want you to stay strong on this, hang in there. But then I tell you that, by the way, you will see me on their side and acting to the contrary to what the cause stands for. But this is all part of the greater plan. So no matter what you see me say in public, do not fall for it. I am with you and it's for the cause. Now you see, once you buy into that, it doesn't matter what I say or do in the real world, you will rationalize it. I could now stand there and tell you, oh, by the way, this whole thing was a lie. Oh, the cause was just something I made up to make money. But you'll be like, he's acting, good. He's really in character. And I'll be like, no, it really is nonsense. It's nonsense. You see, now it doesn't matter what I say. You've bought in to this parable. That's it. You're locked in. So Basil Mitchell gives this example about this is how religion works with a lot of people. So it's interesting, and they call that, by the way, non-propositional faith, where you don't care whether evidence or reason or anything contradicts what you believe. You just don't care. Because in your mind, oh, it's all part of the bigger picture. Oh, it's meant to trick me. Oh, science. Oh, this is the shaitan tricking me. This is part of the test. Like, I'm not supposed to buy into it. Because if I bought into it, that's part of the test. So, you see, then it becomes like, there's no way to win now. It's game over, like for anybody who tries. So it's important to keep these things in mind. Why is this so important to tackle this topic? It's important because, one, the mockery that is being made out of Islam, Allah and His Messenger, in the name of these myths. And two, the tyranny of abuse that is being conducted with this belief. It is unbelievable. I mean, you've heard some stories from Sheikh Akram, Nadwi Sahib right now, but there's countless stories. Abuse, beatings, violence, sexual violence, just power structures, destroying lives, destroying families, exploitation, money, embezzlement, countless. Like people, they will extract, there's so much going on. People will take money, they will take £1,000 per, more. People have houses given to them. I had somebody tell me about a case where the person said, okay, in order to cure this, the sire on this house, you have to really just give it away in the name of Allah. And really maybe you should just give it to me and I'll bless it. And they did, they gifted it to the sheikh. The sheikh then, when I hear these stories, I realize I'm in the wrong business. That's the business you need to be in. So it's the abuse that's being, this abuse, because it's being Islamicized, it's being given an Islamic veneer, what's going to take the brunt of it in the end is Islam. So people will just say, you know what, Islam is just a load of nonsense. And you might not say, I might not say, but the coming generations, our children, when they grow up, they'll probably say, you know what, this is just mythology. Islam has just become mythology. Like Zeus and Apollo and the Greek gods or the Hindu gods. It's just stories, and because it's nonsensical. So I wanted to highlight that, and I wanted to show some when we can't explain things. Okay, when we can't explain. Now, just to as a few seconds to touch up, we have to understand that, look, in science has gone through many, like when we look at the domain of life, it is so diverse, and this is something I want to come back to when we speak. When I touch up on relationships being impacted with this. But when we can't understand things, look, in psychiatry and psychology, you've got something called neurosis and psychosis. Yeah, neurosis is like it's like weird things, weird beliefs that we can all have, or we display weird things, and we can all do this. This is natural to a great extent. We can all. I would probably say we are all weird in our own way. There's nothing wrong about that, okay, to a certain extent. But some people can't differentiate that weirdness with normalness. So you might be weird when you're at home, but when you're in front of people, you can behave normally. Some people can't do that. That falls into psychosis. They can't snap out of it, okay. And we have many. Today, I'm not saying we have all the answers, but we have some answers that give us, shed light about things that can explain, whoa, how would people have explained this in the past? I've touched up on something in the past saying things like palinopsia, a visual kind of, when you have a problem with after images. Now check this out. Everybody, if you look at something in bright light and you look away, you can maybe for a fraction of a second see an after image. In some conditions, that actually persists for much longer, abnormally, and much stronger. It's not like a shadow after image, it's like a clear after image. Like I look at the phone there, I look there, I can see the phone there. That actually is called palinopsia, and it can, in certain condition, affects people. Now, can you imagine in a village a few hundred years, and this happens with people. I see you here now, I look there, I see you there. How would I explain that in the past? What, an abnormality in the brain? No. Maybe you're a demon. I see you in many places. This is very... there's a condition I've once again I've highlighted before, and it's worth highlighting, called the Charles or the Charles-Bonnet syndrome, where there's a part in the brain called the fusiform gyrus, and this part it gets affected for whatever reason. There's some abnormality in it. Now, people with this start to see, this is the part of the brain that processes imagery about things like teeth, geometric sizes, buildings. So when there's an abnormality, and it usually affects people sometimes who are losing their sight or hearing, and the brain starts to compensate by overactivity in the fusiform gyrus. So they will see things like people with strange buildings. They will see people with stretched faces and weird teeth. So there's a famous case where the neurologist Oliver Sacks speaks about speaking to this lady who sees these men walking in Eastern dress clothing with long teeth. And he asks her that, and she says, am I going mental? And he says that these people, what do they do when you see them? Are they trying to harm you? And she says, no, they're not trying to harm me at all. See, this is the difference between psychos, where people believe that, oh no, I'm getting attacked, like in schizophrenia or different kind of disorders. She says, I see them, but I know they're not real, but I can see them. And it's weird because it's like a movie, but it's... And he explains to her, this is part of the Charles Bonnet syndrome. And when they check that part of the brain where a normal person, if you see teeth, do you know, if you see teeth, there's a part of the brain that actually activates for teeth. Around, there's a neural, within the fusiform gyrus, the neural activity. Now, that part is getting activated. Now, they can suppress this with drugs. You can give drugs and that will just suppress activity. How would you explain this in the past? If somebody came to you and said, oh, I see teeth and I see people, I see buildings, you would have no kind of explanations. And let alone, we also heard some examples of where people sometimes do get better. You know, people say, oh, but so-and-so did this ruqya and they got better. I want to highlight to people the placebo effect. Okay, there's two actually. It's actually interesting because there's a study I'll bring your attention to as well. It's by Ted Kapchuk, who is an associate professor at Harvard University, a medical professor. I want to bring your attention to some of his studies. But before that, I just want to highlight there's a placebo effect where you think something is happening and it's actually happening. It creates and there's the opposite called the nocebo effect, which causes harm, where you actually can cause harm. And this actually happens and has been tested and through trials. It's not just something that people have made up. But what was interesting about this study, just to highlight the placebo effect, is Ted Kapchuk, what he had done was with about 270 subjects, they wanted to test them who were suffering from certain pains to do with the wrists, or they had like the carpal syndrome, or their elbows or the shoulders were hurting. He got half of them and he administered them a pill, which was actually just nothing. It was just made out of cornstarch or whatever, and just useless pill, but told them that, okay, this may have these kind of side effects, and this is what it was. And the other half were administered acupuncture. And they were told that, why don't you take some acupuncture and stuff like this? Have you got stress? You know, it's hurting here, it's hurting here. And, you know, with the needles, acupuncture, you're all aware of it. So what happened is, to their amazement, almost a third of the people started to complain, and some very severely, of the side effects that they warned, including, from just sluggish behavior to not being able to get out of bed to excruciating pain, to being like, oh, feeling dizzy, I can't do this, the exact symptoms which they warned of, a third. The half that he had given acupuncture, more of them, a great quantity of them, actually said that they felt a lot better and they felt relief. Now, so from this study, you could say, well, that's brilliant. Acupuncture works better than medicine. Well, actually it doesn't, because both were a sham. Not only were the pills he was giving fake, but the needles that he was using were actually retractable and didn't even go in the skin. They were actually just giving the illusion that they were using needles. They weren't actually, they were sham needles. The interesting thing this showed was that the pain that people were feeling, insomnia, can't go to sleep, nausea, throwing up, was real. It was actually happening. This wasn't like, oh, they weren't throwing up. The person was actually really throwing up. They were really feeling pain. It's called psychosomatic behavior, where you actually can get ill. It's called the nocebo effect. And the placebo effect, where you can actually get better. So when people are going through jinn exorcisms or ruqya or things like this, things can actually work. It's not that but they could work anyway. It's like you heard Sheikh say that, but some people would get better anyway. It's not, and it's a bit like that scam. If I go through it with so many people, by the end of it, I'm going to have a hardcore cult that definitely always get better. Like imagine you did that same experiment, but with exorcism or with ruqya, same thing. Somebody could ask, well, what is the purpose of ruqya? See, ruqya, in my understanding, first of all, the Quran, when it came to say that the Quran is a shifa, we need to read the full verse. Don't just stop where it says wa shifa. It says shifa only ma fi sudur. It is a shifa for what is in the hearts. What is it talking about? Like what? Like cardiological heart diseases. It's not talking about heart diseases. It's talking about disbelief, kufr, superstitions, myths, these very things which Islam came to eradicate. Now you might say, well, yeah, but so why these ruqya then? Why these? First of all, we do believe that, look, Allah knows His creation, and how He helps His creation is not sometimes truly understood by us. But at the same time, these things work as a scaffolding to help people until their iman becomes stable. Because when you come from, it is very easy for humans to fall into superstitious behavior. It's very easy. We too easily. In fact, part of the study that I spoke about of Ted Kapchuk, they realized that, with the acupuncture, that rituals, one of the findings was that rituals and drugs use the very same biochemical pathways in the brain. That was groundbreaking to realize that when people are undergoing rituals, it's highlighting the same neural activity that drugs would use, the same pathways. So there is this, that human beings are very easily misguided into superstition. So ruqya and these things have been set as a scaffolding with Allah's name to guide people to a pure iman. So it is a scaffolding, it's like a Zimmer frame to help you walk until you can walk. It's that kind of to help you along the way. Because you see, when people said, oh, but I'm like to the Prophet, oh, what about superstition? And he taught them the dua. Allahumma la tayra illa tayruk wa la khayra illa khayruk wa la ilaha ghayruk. He could have just said, relax, there is no tatayyur, there is no, auspicious, you don't need to worry about it. Why teach them a dua, that too one which has almost a ritualistic rhythm to it? Because the mind clings to rituals. And people need that to become strong in their iman. So with this, I want to just give you some examples of some conditions, psychological disorders. Now check these out and just think in the past trying to examine these. Now there's a condition known as, you've got prosopagnosia. Yeah. Now this is a condition known as face blindness. It can happen to people who are stroke victims, or they could happen due to mental health sometimes. And they say maybe 2.5% of people in the world are born with it. It is an inability to distinguish between faces. So there's a section in what we said, the fusiform gyrus, which is known as the FFA, the facial fusiform area, which humans use to distinguish between faces. Why does your face not look like his face, not look like if you think about it, like if you look at a crow, right? A crow, all their faces all look the same to us. But to the crows, I'm sure they can distinguish. So how do humans distinguish between human faces? Like we use this area in the brain. Now there is a disorder known as prosopagnosia where you can't tell the difference. Like if I hear your voice, I would say, oh my God, that's you. But when I look at you, I just can't recognize your face. Like I can see your face, but I can't recognize it. Now that is, and when that happens, it happens later on in, like let's say with a stroke or something, and you can imagine the whole trauma. And how would people in the past say, well, maybe magic has been done onto you, or maybe you've had something has possessed you. There's something known as mirror touch synesthesia. Now this is where you can actually feel what somebody else that you're looking at may be feeling. So if right now, let's say somebody hugged somebody else And if you suffered from mirror touch synesthesia, you would actually feel being hugged. You would actually sometimes feel pain. Like if I saw somebody getting hurt, I would feel that pain. Under this, you can Google phantom limbs. Sometimes people have lost their limbs, and yet they can still, like they've been amputated in an accident or something, and they can still, so they've lost their arm, but they can still feel the pain in their arm. There's huge studies on this and how that works in the brain. How would you answer that in the past? There's actually, there's one speaking of alien hand syndrome, where you feel your hand or your part of your body is possessed by an alien and acts involuntarily. Somebody could just say, well, that's easy because the jinn's controlling it. Well, but I mean, see, this is that your view fits all. Here's an interesting one. This is known as the Capgras delusion, right? Where people feel that a loved one, somebody close to them, is actually replaced by an imposter. And you think this is, and this happens to people often, sometimes with paranoid schizophrenia, or if they've had brain injury. You actually feel that it's the same, like it looks just like the same person, but you actually believe 100% that that is an imposter. He knows the same things, but it's an imposter. And you can actually search the cases that have happened in real life, the Capgras delusion. Now, here, and this is, here's another interesting one, hemispatial neglect. Happens sometimes after a stroke or other kind of brain injuries or lesions. Hemispatial neglect is where half of the world, half of perception becomes blind to you. You just can't, it just doesn't get processed. So you don't see half, like it's not that you don't see, like you can see, but you will not see what's on that half. So you will just see this half. So these people will sometimes only eat half a plate. If you give them a plate, they'll only eat from that half. Or if you showed them a clock and said, can you copy the clock? They will copy it from with the numbers 12 to 6 only. And they don't see the others. How would you explain that if you lived in the past? And here's an interesting one as well. Aphantasia. Now this was an interesting one, and it happened, there was a famous case of a 65-year-old man who went for, he'd gone for some angioplasty surgery, and after it, this was a side effect, that he lost the ability to visualize anything. You just can't picture up anything in your mind anymore. Like right now, if I wanted to think of an elephant, if I wanted to think of a phone or a car, in your mind, you can think of it. He could no longer think of any, you can't visualize any images. Now, you can imagine how that so easily, people would just say, well, maybe somebody's done magic on you, or a demon has possessed you. I mean, just think in the past trying to answer these difficulties. Things like, there's actually one known as an exploding head syndrome, which causes no harm, no pain, but you can just occasionally hear a really loud bang inside your head. But it doesn't harm you, there's no pain, but you just hear like a bang. You think, and you can, but I definitely heard it, but it's not real. And one that you can actually, this one you can actually see on YouTube, you can go and search several cases, an interesting one, the foreign accent syndrome. It's just really fascinating. It's a speech disorder. Sometimes develops spontaneously. Or sometimes after an incident, something's happened where they just wake up or they're regaining something. It could be an accident or whatever. And they develop a foreign accent. So you've got the case on YouTube with the lady speaking in a Chinese accent and somebody in a French accent. They've never been to France. Somebody in a southern accent. They're from northern England. I mean, and they just all of a sudden speaking in a southern accent. Inexplicable. They can't explain. Even today, neurologists don't know why it happens, but it happens due to, see, not knowing something doesn't mean, see, this is what atheists use so often to attack people of religion, or what they call the God of the gaps. Or the moment you don't know anything, Oh, it must be God. And in this phenomenon, this is like the jinn of the gaps. Like the moment we don't know anything, it's the jinn. Oh, we can't explain it, must be the jinn. It's like the jinn of the gaps. So it's not just because we don't know the answer, it doesn't mean we can't know the answer. The hadith that you heard earlier on, that the Prophet said, مَا أَنزَلَ اللَّهُ مِن دَاءٍ إِلَّا أَنزَلَ لَهُ شِفَاءً. In a riwayah, the Prophet said, عَلِمَهُ مَنْ عَلِمَ وَجَهِلَهُ مَنْ جَهِلَ. Those who know the shifa will know it, and those who don't know it won't know it. Meaning, go out and find it. Like you can't. So it's interesting to see all of these kind of things. Put yourself in the past where you are faced with this. Like if you had a person just all of a sudden with multiple personality disorders, what they call today dissociative identity disorders, right? Now, how do you explain that? Like people, all of a sudden I'm somebody else. And the thing is that a lot of these cases happen usually more often in our communities amongst women. And these people have a background of trauma, abuse, of just like tragedies in many cases. They've got so much going on. So in our communities, you'll have things like, obviously segregation, but not just segregation, control, excessive control. So let's say a girl in a typical, I know in the UK it's a change, it's slowly changing, but it's still there. Like girls are not allowed to do anything, guys can do anything. Guy can get away with, guys can go out, do everything. Girls can't. So always restricted at home. Now on top of that, always suspected, like suspicious, oh, are you chatting to anybody? Are you doing this? Are you doing, a lot more control on a girl. Then on top of that, arranged marriages, sometimes forced marriages, or sometimes maybe not forced, but emotional, like our Asian version of forced, like the blackmail kind of emotional blackmail that, oh, I'm never going to speak to you. And then on top of that, they make them marry, a lot of the time, their own cousins. Now think about it, if you grew up with somebody, you already, you're probably not attracted to the person sexually. And then on top of that, you got to marry them, you've been controlled all your life. Sometimes within our families, hopefully now within the UK it's reduced or doesn't happen as much, but they beat the hell out of you as kids, right? So a lot more maybe when we were growing up. But so you've got all this kind of stuff going on. You get like torture, torment, this, oh, you got to believe this, you got to do this, How does the psyche cope? One way is it breaks down into these kind of disorders. It starts reacting weirdly. Like think about it, if you physically do something to your body, it reacts. Why would the brain not react? We think everybody and we have such a stigma towards mental health. Muslims get so offended if you say this could be a mental health issue. So what do you mean? Like my mom ain't mental. I think well, I'm not a betting man, but if I was. The thing is, look, what do you mean? Like, well, does this sound normal, what you're saying? That, there's all this going on and airy fairy tales and all this kind of stuff. No, but she's not. No, it's the jinn. God damn it. It's the jinn. That makes sense. Or it's magic. Or my relationship has broken down. Because of the jinn. Somebody sent jinn to interfere with us. Now, I've said, okay, even if, right, we were to consider what the jinn are, and this is when I was saying earlier on, they would be a different domain. So they speak about life breaking off into these domains. You have archaea, bacteria, and eukarya. And from eukarya comes all animal, plants, all this kind of stuff. Yeah, archaea actually is they probably feel the most ancient form of life on Earth, which is tiny, microscopic, it's single cell, doesn't have nuclei to it. And it is actually what they call an extremophile. I'm just giving an example. It survives in extreme, it could survive in up to 150 degrees. It thrives, boiling water wouldn't kill it. Freezing temperatures generally wouldn't kill it. It survived in space. It doesn't require oxygen. It doesn't require photosynthesis the way other things do. This is archaea. It thrives in hot lava and stuff like that. Somebody could say, well, Allah says, وَالْجَانَ خَلَقْنَاهُ مِنْ قَبْلُ مِنْ نَارِ السَّمُومِ. We created them from fire. But if you were to draw parallels of life with anything, I'm not saying they are archaea, but you would draw them with things like this, these things which are extremophiles, completely different to eukarya, where we get our life kind from plants and animals and humans and so on. Yet, so would you say, oh, a bacteria is jealous of my relationship? Oh, that, my relationship messed up because this jinn fell in love with me, or fell in love with my wife, or fell in love with, and it just ruined everything. That's like, oh, this virus was just flying around and it fell in love with me and ruined my whole love life. It's like, what the hell is that? Doesn't make any. So why do you think jinn work like that? Like, oh, they work like humans. They're not the same species or genus. They're not even the same domain as us. Like, so it's important to understand these things. We can't just belittle. We have to take responsibility. If a relationship messes up, it's because of your own doing, because the relationship messed up. Human beings, look, they mess up at times. It's not, sorry, I'd like to take that word back. Even messing up isn't the right word. People at times fall in and out of relationships. It's human behavior. There's nothing, you can't measure your success by your relationships, as an example, because we have a vision that a relationship ought to be like this. We feel we've failed and we need somebody to blame it on. Sometimes there was a case study, I don't want to go into it, and I've highlighted it before, where there was a very religious person, a Iraqi, an exorcist, who many years back I had the opportunity to interview and visit, and whilst we were speaking, his jinn came into character, came into form, and we had this whole dialogue and discussion, and I spoke to the jinn, and it went on for over an hour. And he told me his name, and he told me where he's from. His name was, I've highlighted the story in detail before. His name was Hukma. He came up with a name. My name is Hukma. And he's from India, he's from Kashmir, and he's 500 years old. All nice numbers and a scenario. But the interesting thing was when I asked him, oh, well, you're a long way from home, soldier. What are you doing over here? And so, well, what it was is that usual scenario, well, this guy, the exorcist, I love him, and then I realized, oh, he didn't mean I love him. I said, I'm sure you do love him. He said, no, I really love him, and he stuck his tongue out, and I was like, oh, okay. I misread that one. I thought you meant that you just love him. Oh, that love. Obviously, at that point, I extremely feared for my own safety, thinking, right, I don't know how I'm going to relate this story back to people. Right, so I thought, but what was interesting is he then goes on to explain that, oh, actually, he's homosexual. The jinn, this is the jinn talking, sorry. The jinn is speaking to me. Obviously, the person is speaking, and whilst he was speaking, he would do all this, he speak like that. Obviously, once again, very ominous, very kind of trying to be scary. And so I was like, I'm homosexual. And so I was like, okay. Well, so the thing is, you see now, look, here is a person who is very religious. He has in fact, that guy had an extraordinarily long beard, very incredibly long. It was abnormally long. It was like this long, wallahi, it was so long. It was scary long at that point. Now, I don't know, I haven't seen the person in years. But anyway, at that point, he had a very, very long beard. Very scruffy looking person, religious, that kind of attire, the thobe, and has a name amongst people. He's an exorcist. Now you can imagine, he must be thinking to himself, look, I'm having homosexual tendencies. I'm a man of God, for God's sake. I'm one of the good guys. How could I be having this? How could I be thinking deviously about men? So, displacement of guilt. It's easy. Look, psychoanalysts explain it all the time. You just project your demons onto something else and chastise them. Say, oh, it's not me. It's a jinn. The jinn is gay. This jinn, may Allah curse it, has possessed me, and that's why I'm thinking like, it all makes sense. Obviously, I could never think like this. It's the jinn that's thinking like this. So it's okay when I think like this, because really that's just the jinn in me doing that. And, when I'm in control, then it's me. You see, this is how this person made sense of his world. I'm not saying the person is lying. I'm not saying he's trying to lie to me. He's not like saying, hey, listen, this person's coming, I'm going to trick him now. Maybe he genuinely believes what the story he's come up with. But that doesn't make it true. Like if you genuinely believe there's a spaghetti monster out there, it doesn't make it true. So these are the things that I wanted to highlight, that look, in the past there were many things that people could not explain. We could not sum up, but to say it's the jinn of the gaps is nonsensical, it's absurd. And it makes religion into a joke, and beyond that, it doesn't tackle the greater issues of abuse. So this isn't, sometimes people say, but why can't we just sit on the fence? You know, okay, this isn't a view. You know, you're saying, because there were many ulama, you heard from Sheikh Akram, many ulama being quoted. There was Fakhruddin al-Razi, Qadi Abu Ya'la from the Hanbalis. There was people, there were other ulama from the Mu'tazila, but even within Ahl Sunnah, you'd heard up until recent times, Sheikh Shaltut, Mustafa al-Maraghi, the great Mashaykh of Al-Azhar, Ibn Ashur, famous Mufassir, even Shawkani in his tafsir. These kind of things, they don't accept this kind of stuff, jinn possession, but people say, okay, this is an opinion, but Ibn Taymiyyah said this. And, you know, so-and-so said this. But so why don't we just have it as two opinions? No. Because it's not just, this isn't like, should I do Raf al-Yadayn or should I not do Raf al-Yadayn? Because look, Raf al-Yadayn or not Raf al-Yadayn is no big deal. If you decide to do Raf al-Yadayn or I decide to do it and you decide not to do it, it's a fadila within Salah, there's two opinions. This opinion results in mass exploitation, in incredible, the tyranny of abuse is unleashed by this. Huge, a whole multi-million-dollar industry is on the back of this belief. Religion is ridiculed on the back of that. You believe in demons possessing you. I mean, in the 21st century, let's like, people will go to a doctor, it's okay, he's just got a jinn. And then Islam, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is ridiculed as a consequence. And all of these things make this unacceptable to just say, well, look, it's just two opinions. Let's just be diplomatic towards it. So this is why I refuse to have a diplomatic stance on this, that this abuse is unacceptable, it needs to be brought to an end, and we need to popularize this understanding in saying, and this is why, hopefully people, obviously yourselves here, but people who watch this later on can learn from this, inshallah. So hayyakum Allah. So I hope that's of some help.